Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Doctor Is In. My name is Corey Burnell, and I'm filling in for Mike Taylor, who couldn't be with us this time, to join Dr. Randy Smart in discussing differences between viruses and bacterium. And thank you, Dr. Smart, again for this episode.
Great to be here today.
Well, thank you, and for me too. I think this is going to be an interesting topic, and certainly very timely for our viewers.
Very timely.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know you, who haven't seen the show before, I mean, you're the CEO of the Mark Twain Healthcare District, and how long have you been in that position?
About 2.5, 3 years. I was elected to the board in 2012 and served as a board member for about 5 years. And then there was an opportunity to do more with the board and with the community. So I jumped at the opportunity and I became the CEO of the district, and it's a job I absolutely love. A lot of fun.
So it doesn't feel like work too much, huh?
Never,
Yeah.
really, never.
Excellent, you're fortunate in that regard. Well, how long have you been a physician?
I was a little bit of a late start. I was 29 years old when I applied to medical school, and that was in 1981. Graduated 85, residency, 30 plus years.
Well, certainly long enough. You've seen plenty.
It's gone by really fast.
Yeah.
Really fast. It doesn't seem that long ago.
Right. Well, very good. Well, we're honored to have this opportunity to discuss these topics with you. So let's dig into it a little bit. You know, with obviously the coronavirus, COVID-19 going around, it's important for people to know the differences between viral and bacterial infections. So what do you have to share with us today?
Well, the CDC and many of the experts in the country would have said, regardless of COVID-19, people should have a sense of the difference between bacteria and viruses, because they both cause infection, they both can cause harm. And our patients should have some education about that. But, you know, the way I think of this is there's all these things that can get us, you know. There are viruses and bacteria and something we call fungi and up to even attack dogs. I mean, there's all these things that can get us. And it's very interesting to try to understand how they do that and what goes wrong. And so with viruses and bacteria, there are just some fundamental differences. My undergraduate degree at UC Davis was in microbiology, and I was really interested in virology. I actually really believe that viruses were linked to cancer. And so that turned out to be true. It wasn't actually my theory, and I wasn't involved in the research. But I've been interested in viruses for a long time. And so they do cause diseases. Yeah. They're obviously dangerous.
Yeah.
So are bacteria.
Well, let's give our viewers some examples of maybe a disease caused by bacteria and some caused by viruses, so that they can kind of put their fingers on examples.
Sure. So bacteria are known for some very infamous diseases.
Okay.
One would be strep throat.
Oh, okay.
Caused by the bacteria strep. One would be tetanus. Bacteria can cause pneumonia. Bacteria can cause sepsis. Bacteria commonly cause skin infections. Maybe you've heard of MRSA, which is kind of a boil kind of skin infection. Okay. So those would be some very notorious bacterial infections. And then with the viruses, there are also a number of infamous infections. Polio would be an example. Smallpox would be an example. Measles. So both of them can be deadly and can be serious. But what's really kind of interesting is to think about what is living and what is not. And as you go through these infections and the organisms that cause them, like a bacteria can move. Like if you look at it under a microscope, you see it move, Sometimes they have little hairs on them.
Right.
They have all this stuff inside them. A virus doesn't do any of that. It's like dormant.
It's like a structure, isn't it? Just kind of like a solid structure.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe I've pictured bacteria as kind of like an organism in a cell, something that can be killed.
So the discussion with bacteria and viruses sort of transcends this idea of what's living and what isn't. And
Okay.
there isn't exactly agreement on that. But I think of a virus kind of like the lunar lander. You know, it's kind of like this thing, this capsule, and it's got a bunch of stuff inside it, and it's absolutely harmless until it attaches to you. And that's where things start to become a problem.
Whereas bacteria, I essentially can move itself, and now is it with a bacterial infection? Is it that the bacteria is giving off some type of poison or something, or is it actually killing cells? Is it actually attacking human cells?
Well, both.
It is. It does both.
So there are bacteria there's a lot of bacteria that are really beneficial. They live on your skin, they live in your gut, they live in your eyes, your nose. They're harmless, but there are bacteria that are pathogenic. And those pathogenic bacteria try to find a way to get into your body. And they usually do that through openings. Your nose would be an example, your ears an example, your mouth, and other various openings.
Sure.
And they try to find a way to get into your body. And when they do that, some will produce toxins.
Okay.
Botulism would be an example of that. Tetanus is an example of that. Some of them just multiply and create sepsis. Some of them actually kill cells.
Oh, okay.
And destroy cells. And then some of them become kind of cohabitants. For example, hepatitis. Those are actually viruses. But some of them will become sort of kind of develop a relationship with the host, the body, and kind of live there for a long time, creating problems, but not killing or doing too much damage.
Like a parasite, huh?
Kind of like a parasite, exactly, yeah. So there's a whole variety of ways they do that. And the same is true with the viruses. The viruses, they don't produce toxins, but if you think of this little spaceship example I was talking about,
Yeah.
what they do is that spaceship will then attach to a cell, and it's very specific about which cells it attaches to.
Okay.
And when it does that, it ejects the material inside it into the cell. And when it does that, it takes over the machinery of the cell, and the virus then kind of hijacks the cell.
Right.
Is the way you could think of it. And so then the viral material inside of the cell becomes duplicated. It makes hundreds of viruses. Ultimately, that cell explodes, and about 100 viruses come out.
Wow, okay. So it replicates inside the cell, and then, boom, now you've got more of them, huh?
Exactly, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Oh, fascinating. I understood that they kind of hijack and need another cell. They need a cell in order to do what it is they do, but I didn't know that they then eventually blow it up, and that's, I guess, how it spreads inside your system, huh?
Exactly, yeah.
Now, does our immune system, with viruses versus bacteria, can our immune system actually kill the virus, or does it kill the cell that once the virus is in it?
It can do both.
It can do both, okay.
Right.
And then with bacteria, our immune system literally kills the bacteria, right? Is that the objective?
Well, it tries to.
Okay, well, we'll get there then,
Sometimes
I
it
guess.
succeeds, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, let's talk about viruses then, how our immune system goes after them.
Right, so one of the most important cells are called phagocytes. And these are macrophages, and these macrophages will attack a virus encapsulated within the cell and kill it.
Okay.
But there are many, many chemical mediators that your body triggers that are released, and those mediators then attack the virus, sometimes they attack the cell accidentally, but they try to kill the virus. Now the problem, or at least part of the problem, is that immune attack can be damaging to your own body. So if that response, that defensive response is big enough, you can be damaged by your own immune system. And that's, I think, in large part where people get into trouble.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's interesting. Now, is that, I think I'm somewhat familiar with that, in that, like with immunotherapy drugs, is that part of the risk of them, that it can kind of overheat the immune system? And if the immunotherapy drug has a negative side effect, for example, that it kind of gets the immune system going too hot, or is that, am I misunderstanding that?
It's more the immunotherapy drug suppresses the immune system.
Oh, okay.
So they're typically used to combat an immune-mediated disease like rheumatoid arthritis or systemic lupus erythematosus. So we have these autoimmune diseases, and immunotherapy is used to suppress those autoimmune diseases, suppress the immune system, and those patients become more vulnerable because they cannot really muster a good or a normal immune response.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So now you mentioned that sometimes our immune system can be part of the problem here, in that it can get overzealous and actually be attacking our own healthy cells, and it's zealotry for getting the virus and killing the virus. Is that?
It's a real problem we have clinically, Corey, is when somebody becomes infected, there's two things going on: the infection, the bacteria, or the virus, but also your immune response to that.
Okay.
And that's really the what we call the pathophysiology of sepsis, is your immune system goes in and says, get it, get it, get it. Well, many times it has a little trouble recognizing the bad guys from the good guys. So it's getting everything, and you can create problems of blood pressure, vital signs, brain function, kidney function, lung function. So it's kind of, and we really struggle with this, like how much immune response do you really need? And at what point do you try to suppress that immune response with maybe a steroid treatment or maybe an immunosuppressive? But it's a real active area of research now, and I don't think we really know the answer to that. I would say the majority of people that succumb to a viral infection, the immune system is probably a significant part of that in terms of being too robust or too active.
Interesting.
Not all of them, but in many, many cases.
Are there kind of templates that body types or templates to this that, oh, okay, we can see through tests that maybe one person's immune system is going to react a certain way to a viral infection, and this other template of our person's immune system might react differently, and then that cause variation in treatment from physicians?
Well, you're right on the forefront of what we're trying to understand. I mean,
Okay.
you should be working in a hospital. Those are the exact questions we're asking.
I just play a doctor on TV.
And clearly people have different immunogenetic responses, and some of them are very robust, some of them are pretty wimpy.
Okay.
But we don't really understand how to identify that, nor really how to control it. And so we in terms of sepsis and immunoresponsiveness, we're still into this kind of thing where one size fits all.
Okay.
It's a little bit embarrassing that we're not farther along, but if you were to come in and I were to come in with the same viral infection, we would be treated the same. And we may have two totally different immune systems and immune responses.
Right, right. Okay. So then bacterial infections, and then maybe after we talk about this, maybe we can share with your viewers the difference in treating these types of infections. But with bacterial infections, our immune system, does it react differently? Like, for example, I've heard that viruses, those receptors you've talking about, they kind of hit particular cells, and our immune system tries to block those receptors, does it not?
Right.
With bacteria, does our immune system act differently and just trying to kill the bacterium itself?
You know, to be honest with you, Corey, there's probably more similarities than differences.
Oh, okay.
And with bacteria, you get a robust immune response. With viruses, you get that. You get a. There are differences. There are something called T cells that are a little more viral oriented, but there are also antibody responses, and you produce a lot of antibodies. Probably a little more toward bacteria than viruses,
Okay.
but for both. So your immune system is very capable and very important, and it recognizes something as foreign, as dangerous. An alert goes off, cells start mobilizing, and chemicals are produced, proteins are produced within your body, and all of that is geared toward killing the bad thing. But they tend to be, as far as I can recall, pretty similar for both processes.
Okay.
And they both can produce a sepsis-type syndrome where somebody is in shock and is life-threatening. You can certainly have that with both viruses and with bacteria.
So in a situation, in an infectious situation, there are tests that can measure the level of immune response and whether it may be getting dangerous? Does that?
Kind of again on the forefront of medicine.
Okay.
And there are proteins in your body that are messengers called interleukins. And there's interleukin 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12. And these interleukins are produced, and they can be measured, but they're usually not measured in a routine clinical setting. They're measured more as a research tool. But what experimenters are looking at now and researchers is, let's say you and I both come in, can you measure interleukin 6 in real time, like on a graph? And let's say your interleukin 6 is really high and mine's not so high. What can they do about you that they wouldn't do for me? And so that's kind of available in a research setting, but not really ready for prime time.
Yeah, general practice, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about then when somebody has a viral or a bacterial infection, the different ways in which they're treated by physicians.
Well, that is one of the most kind of fundamental things patients and medical people should know, is that antibiotics work for bacteria. And they don't work for viruses, they don't work for fungi, they work for bacteria only. And so we're pretty good at determining when you're infected with a bacteria versus a virus. And for the bacteria, antibiotics are wonderful. They absolutely work. They've been around since 1926, penicillin, and many, many, many others. But if you take that antibiotic, and let's say you come in with a viral infection, it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
Are they ever misprescribed, do you think?
Commonly.
Okay.
Very commonly.
Yeah.
And I would say about half of the problem is the docs who say, sure, you know, I'll give you, are you familiar with Z-Packs?
Yes, yeah.
So the doc will say, sure, here's a Z-Pack for your cold.
Right.
Well, the Z-Pack doesn't work for a cold.
Yeah, I've wondered about that.
But half of the problem really is patients that are kind of loaded with some misinformation. And they come in and say, well, I'm infected, I have a cold, I need a Z-Pack. And you have about a 10-15 minute discussion with them that just goes the wrong way. And at the end of that, they say, I'm going to get a Z-Pack. I need to have an antibiotic. And in my practice, 9 times out of 10, I say, fine, you can take it. It's not going to help. But then it gets kind of confusing for them because they're at the end of their syndrome, and they take the Z-Pak and they got better, and they say, man, it made me better.
Correlation's
it worked.
not causation, huh?
The doctor was wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a big problem, the confusion with antibiotics and viral diseases. And I don't think it's one we'll ever really conquer because patients are insistent about taking something if they're sick.
Gotta do something, right?
And if you say, there's really nothing we can do, which may be the case with this new viral infection, they don't like that. They say, what do you mean there's nothing we can do? You have to do something.
Yeah.
Zinc, antibiotics, something. And say, no, there's really nothing we can do.
Yeah. Well, now, what of some of the therapies? You mentioned our body produces antibodies when there is a viral infection, and then we recover. So perhaps we're a recovered patient from a viral infection, and our body still has those antibodies in it. So I know some companies are harvesting those antibodies from healthy recovered patients to try to use in treatment of sick patients who have the same viral infection.
True.
Is there promise there? Is it commonly done with viral infections?
It is done. You can take somebody who has immune sera, we call it sera, S-E-R-A, and with the proper screening and chemistry, give that to an infected person, not particularly in this case. I'm not sure about that in the COVID case. But there are other examples of that where that can be really beneficial. If I recall right, hepatitis A was one of those examples where you could give somebody what we call immunoglobulin, and you could give them a big shot in the tush with some immunoglobulin, and that could be very beneficial. But as a rule, it's not something we do a lot.
Is it not readily available or expensive, or is there jury still out on efficacy?
Jury's still out. There are some fallbacks because it has to be screened. It's kind of labor intensive.
Oh, okay.
And you don't want to give somebody a disease they don't have. You don't want to give them HIV
Good point.
hepatitis or Ebola. So there are some drawbacks and some cautions. It's probably 5 on a scale of 10 for good science.
Okay.
It can work. But what really works is the idea of you producing antibodies to these infections. And you definitely produce antibodies. And that is the whole concept behind vaccinations. And that's why vaccinations work so well. Because you can take, let's say the space capsule example, where you have this virus. And let's say in a research lab, you can take a piece of that off. Not the whole thing, just a piece. And you can put it in the right mouse model or animal model and produce a bunch of antibodies, purify the antibodies, take them, and then you can give them to people and find benefit that way. But even better yet, let's say you take that piece of virus and you actually put it in your arm, you inject it into you, like an influenza vaccine.
Yeah.
Then you'll produce antibodies to that. And when that virus tries to attack you and harm you, those antibodies are on it.
They're right there.
And that's very efficacious. That really works. But what was really impressive to me about the start of the COVID epidemic is they were able to take prior research and prior work on the SARS and the MERS virus and fast track that into vaccine production.
Right.
And even though that's a year off or many, many months off, it was some just really cool science. It was some great science.
Yeah.
Where people, there's something called sequencing, where you can sequence a virus, the genome, the stuff inside the space capsule. And they were able to sequence this thing within about 10 days.
Wow.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that neat?
It's fascinating. You know, I being in the business I'm in, we constantly see technological development. And for those of us who feel some level of hopelessness right now with the COVID-19 infection, technology does solve so many problems. It takes time.
Right,
but we've solved these problems.
And our
We ought to have
science
hope.
community is so developed right now. There's so many things we can do and we do know. And we don't share those with the public. I mean, the public probably isn't that interested in what we do. But from the research side, the science community is just so impressive about what they can do. And these are people that work in labs day after day after day. And they're passionate about their work.
Well, I would think.
And at the end of the day, they have antibodies or they have animal models, mouse models. And at the end of the day, they've done what used to take 5 to 10 years to do, if that.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, they're really on the cutting edge of changing the world every day. They're incrementally changing the world for the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. They're heroes.
Yeah, they are. We have just a couple more minutes left, but I did want to touch on transmissibility between viral infections and bacterial infections. And, my gut was telling me, well, the common cold being viral, the flu being viral must be so more easily to transmit viruses, but you mentioned strep throat being bacterial, and that's very easily transmitted, right? So
pretty much.
Yeah. Is there any difference in transmissibility of one being more commonly easily transmitted than another?
Well, yes. The answer is yes, but it's a tough question because in some diseases, 1 or 2 bacteria or virus can cause an infection. And others, it has to be a much larger number, like 1,000.
Oh, okay.
Or even 10,000. And that's called the inoculum. And so in some diseases, they're just not easily transmissible because there may be only 1 or 2 viruses, and that's not enough. In others, like this one, it probably doesn't take a lot of virus.
Yeah.
And they're much more transmissible. And then you have to look at the vehicle of transmission, whether that's water, air, body secretions,
Right.
Mosquitoes. And the vehicle for this is sneezing and coughing.
Right.
And we're a very gregarious society where we have a lot of close contact. And so it's a vehicle that lends itself to easy transmissibility.
That's probably the main ingredient that contributes to transmissibility than the vehicle, really, huh?
It really is.
Okay.
Right.
Dr. Smart, you are a wealth of information, and I would love to fill in for Mike anytime on this show.
I've enjoyed it, Corey.
Thank you.
It's
Me
been
too.
a lot of fun.
Me too. And thank you, viewers, for joining us, and we'll see you next time the doctor's in.